I want to, in all seriousness, consider whether we may have shifted experienced realities. There's lots of evidence, which I'm sure is going to strike a chord with many people watching this, to suggest that this may well be the case. The most obvious expression of it is what's referred to as the Mandela effect, which is a very real phenomenon. It is a thing. It's just been misnamed, in my view, because I personally vividly remember Nelson Mandela being released from jail, going on to become president of South Africa. And I remember a big music concert in his honour in Wembley in 1990, I guess, whereas many other people seem to remember that Nelson Mandela died in jail. There are many other things, though, that I do remember a certain way, which are no longer that way. And we get gaslit into thinking that it's just us. It's our erroneous memories. We've misremembered things. That is the ultimate definition of gaslighting, making you think that you're crazy as a result of something that's being done to you by a manipulator. So it is a very real thing, but it's interesting that people seem to remember different things. And it makes me wonder whether there are kind of personalized, bespoke Mandela effects for individuals. I'll come back to that thought. There are other pieces of evidence as well to suggest that the reality that we're now inhabiting is different to the one that many of us remember. In terms of when the shift may have happened, I think it's quite a few years ago. It's within the 2000s. And it's difficult to pinpoint an exact year. But some of the other things that seem to have changed are, I've mentioned this one before, it's a bit of a personal bugbear of mine, the sun being white. Now, I happen to think this is quite important. The life-giving object or force or whatever it is that sustains all life has completely changed appearance. It used to be golden yellow or orange throughout the day, which is why kids, when they used to draw a summer's day, would draw the sun as a yellow disk in the sky. You never got kids drawing a white disk in the sky in their pictures because the sun used to be yellow. Now it's only yellow at sunrise and sunset, and the rest of the day it's a bright, blinding white. I'd quite like to know why. Time seems to be speeding up. This is something that people often comment on, and it can be argued that it's subjective. It just feels like time is speeding up. Of course, it's not. How can it? Because clocks keep constant time, and the sky clocks, the heavens, the luminaries keep constant time. But has something shifted there? Because a question that I've posed previously is, are the equinoxes and solstices shifting in terms of when we experience them? So last winter, at the time of the winter solstice, I noticed that things seem to have peaked round about 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they normally do. So ordinarily, you get the shortest day in what's referred to as the Northern Hemisphere on or around the 21st of December. But last year, I noticed towards the end of November and very early December, the days were very short, and then from early December, they seemed to be lengthening in terms of the amount of daylight that we were getting. Then, thinking back to March, the time of the spring equinox, I noticed a similar phenomenon. So, equal day and night, which is what equinox means, seems to have occurred earlier than the date of 21st of March that we're normally given. So, it will be interesting to note what happens in the next few days, given that the summer solstice in this part of the world is said to occur around about the 21st of June. That's the longest day, of course. So we'll see if in the next few days things seem to have peaked earlier than they normally do. So a lot of people say that it feels as if time is just zipping away. And time is, of course, an abstract concept. It only exists within this realm, within the rules of engagement that have been set into place here. Once you get outside of the 3D physical world, so-called, time doesn't exist. But you hear many people say, how can it be June already? It feels like January was just a month ago. Everything's just happening so quickly. So is that down to how we're perceiving things? because time only exists within our perception, we feel the passage of time because we're decoding it into our personal realities. So has something happened to the coded reality that is responsible for the play out of time? This again comes down to the core based reality of this realm, which I have long maintained is a computer style mathematically coded program that we're all in. So there's that. And another thing that seems to have changed would be the amount of people who seem to be experiencing anxiety and trauma and what you could refer to as existential dread, which I think is a really great term to sum up. So there's that. And another thing that seems to have changed is the sheer amount of people who seem to be experiencing anxiety, trauma, often for no ostensible reason, but just the feeling that something is off. Something's not right. Things aren't what they were. And also what's referred to as existential dread, which I think is a great term to sum up what we're talking about here. Just a feeling of dread that we exist. And I personally never used to experience this. I certainly do now on a daily basis, and I know many others do because they write in and tell me so. But I don't remember experiencing any of these things, certainly prior to about 2010. So why is it that so many people report feeling this same creeping, crippling feeling of anxiety? And as I say, often it's difficult to pinpoint any specific reason why that should be the case, but it's a very real trend. Again, many people tell me this. So what's responsible for all these things? Why do things feel so different? Why does it sometimes feel like we're living in a completely different world to the one that so many of us remember? One explanation that's often given is that this shift in our reality is the result of experimentation that's been happening at CERN in Switzerland, below Geneva, in an underground base there. So CERN are on the public record as experimenting with space and time. They've got the Large Hadron Collider there, which they openly admit in the public arena is there to try and recreate the conditions of the so-called Big Bang. I mean, something clearly created this existence, but it's not what we're told it was. It wasn't this meaningless, cold, random event that just occurred out of nowhere. So everything comes out of nothing. Can't quite wrap my head around that, how that can be. But also, I can't wrap my head around why anything exists at all. Why is there existence? What created everything? We refer to it as a God source, but what created that? Where did that God source come from? If there was nothing at some point. And this creates the mind-melting possibility that there's always been something. There never was nothing. Existence and being has always been here. A human mind is not capable of wrapping itself around that concept and truly processing it, I feel. It's just not within our abilities. So is it experimentation at CERN that could have resulted in us shifting into what you might call a parallel universe or an alternate reality? My mind, when I think about these things, always goes to the movie Sliding Doors, starring Gwyneth Paltrow, late 90s, I think. Terrible movie in terms of the narrative because it's one of those bloody romantic chick flicks. But in terms of some of the ideas explored, you get a point in the film where the character misses a train that she's trying to take to go home. And because she misses the train, she avoids getting home to find her boyfriend cheating on her in bed with another woman. And in that version of the story, she ditches the boyfriend and her life takes an entirely different turn. And in the version where she misses the train, she gets home later And so the boyfriend's had time to pack his girlfriend out of the house. She's none the wiser. The relationship continues as it was. And that's her course in life. So you get a split narrative where you see what happens to her in one version of the story versus what happens to her in another. And it makes me wonder whether we've shifted realities in a similar way to what's explored in that film. So we've jumped from one possibility in terms of the playouts and the outcomes into another, except we've retained memory of what happened in the other one up to that point of convergence. And we brought some of those memories through with us. That certainly explains the Mandela effect. And it also explains why so many of us remember the world in a very different way. It felt different.